Welcome to Balance by Design. This is the first episode of the podcast, and I'm really glad that you're here. This podcast is for both teachers and leaders. I'm going to talk about things like workload, systems, sustainability, clarity. Those are all issues that both teachers and leaders face. We experience it in different ways because of where we sit in the system, but we both experience it. So in this podcast, I'm going to really focus on what those issues are and, more importantly, what we can do about it. If we just complain and we don't do anything, it's not going to help. So I want to talk about what we can do to reduce the friction that happens with those systems problems. And your actions are going to be different depending on where you are. So as a teacher, you don't have the same authority to make changes that a leader does. And a leader has certain responsibilities and stresses that a teacher doesn't have. So we're going to talk about it from both sides. I got into this because I really care about people. I am really big into trauma-informed instruction and trauma-informed leadership. So I am a relational leader first. That is my primary way of leading. However, you can't just be relational because there's systems problems that get in the way and cause a lot of extra stress and problems. So the more research I did, the more experience I've had in schools, the more I realized that the relationships are only part of it. And teachers understand this too. I mean, you can build relationships with your students all you want, and you should. That's an important thing, but it's not all. You have to do other things too. And if you have a student that's experiencing trauma at home, or they have a learning disability, or there's some other barrier that's getting in the way, relationships only get you so far. You also have systems things that you need to do. You have accommodations and modifications and other things that you put in place. So it's the same with leaders and teachers. You can have a leader that's very relational, and I hope you do because I find that to be a lot more pleasant. But that relational leadership only will go to a certain point. And if the systems aren't in place, you're going to end up with a lot of extra stress and friction. As a leader, if you are only a relational leader, you're probably working way too hard because you are the one that's stepping in all the time to try to fix things that could be fixed if you had some better systems in place. So that's what I'm going to talk about throughout this whole entire podcast. Every episode is going to be some element of that. It's not going to be about productivity hacks. I don't have any for you. It's not about organization or those types of things. It's probably not your issue. The issue is the systems. And so that's what I'm really going to get into and talk about what that means and then what you can do about it. I have a framework that I use when I look at problems or when I'm trying to make changes as a leader in schools. The first thing is to notice. You need to notice what's happening. Sometimes we notice things without noticing them. So we might feel it in our gut, or we just kind of have this like general feeling of like, ugh. But you have to actually notice. You have to really pay attention and say, oh, okay, this is the feeling that I'm having. This is what's happening right now. So that's step one. Step two, you have to name it. You have to really pin it down and put a name on it of what is actually happening here. What is causing the feeling? What's the thing that's getting in my way? So you need to name it. Once you've done that, now you can move into some action and you can respond to it. So you need to pick a way to respond. How are you going to take care of whatever it is that's happening? And then maybe most importantly, you need to sustain it. So once you respond to something, you then need to either keep responding or you need to put something in place so that it's self-sustaining and keeps going. So you do this cycle. And anytime that you have a problem, you have a challenge, you can apply these four things. And not just in school. I mean, this works in other parts of your life too. Notice, name, respond, sustain. You can apply that over and over again. And it really does make a difference when it comes to trying to solve problems or challenges. So let's look at this a little bit more. For notice, what you're noticing is what signals are showing up. I talk about signals a lot. In schools, there's a lot of things that give us signals. Some people might call it data, and I guess in a way it is data, but I think we all get sick of hearing about data-informed instruction sometimes. So I do like data. I am a data person. But I think it's a little bit more than that. Like sometimes it's a vibe. Sometimes the signals are just how you feel about something. And yeah, that's a form of data, but I like signals better. So you're noticing signals. And sometimes it's kind of hard to put your finger on what exactly it is that you're noticing, but that's what this is. And then you name it. What is actually happening? What's going on? What's the thing? And so you have to put a name to it. And I'm going to give you some names to a few tools today that maybe you haven't thought about before. And then for a response, it doesn't have to be something big. It can be small. There's some sort of friction happening. If there wasn't friction, you wouldn't have anything to notice or name. So there's some sort of friction going on. And so when you respond, you need to think, what's something I can do? And something small is almost better than something big. If you try to do some huge, giant response, it's a lot harder. There's going to be more barriers in the way. It's going to be harder to sustain later. It's just, you don't want to go right to the super big, giant option. So looking at what can I do? What small things can I do to respond that can smooth or ease this friction? That's what you're trying to do. And then sustain. This is a part that both leaders and teachers can do. I think leaders are in a good position to do this for a whole school or a whole program, but teachers, you can do this within your own classrooms and your own life too. But what structures can we have that will stop us from recreating the same problem? So that sustain, you want to get rid of the problem. You don't want to have it keep popping up and popping up and popping up, because every time it does, you're putting energy into it. And so the whole idea of my framework and the whole idea of systems thinking is to get rid of problems so they don't keep coming up. I am very, very, very much an advocate for work harder, not stronger. Sorry, work harder, not smarter. That's a big thing for me. And I do that all the time. That's a big part of my life. So today we are going to mostly live in noticing and naming with the problems that I'm going to talk about today. And then the next episode, in episode 2, I will get into respond and sustain a little bit more. So we'll touch on it today, but I'm going to save the meat of that for the second episode, because otherwise it would just be too long. All right, let's look at an example, a real life example, and I'm going to guess I'm not the only person that's experienced this. Imagine being in a meeting, and you're in the meeting, everybody's talking, everyone's nodding along, like, yeah, okay, we get it. And so then the meeting is over, and you all leave, and that's when the conversations start. It's like, hold on a second, what are we supposed to do? When is this supposed to start? Are you doing this? Is she doing it? So these questions, like who's responsible? What exactly did she mean by that? I'm not really sure. Do you know what she meant? So these questions start popping up. I think that everybody has experienced this, where the work seems to start after the meeting. So you're in the meeting where you're supposed to be getting the expectation and the structure of what you're supposed to do, and you may even think that you did understand it until you walk away and you're like, this isn't making sense. As a leader, you might have experienced this where you think that you have given the expectations and you're like, okay, everybody said they understood it. Everybody said they got it. They're good. And then all of a sudden, nobody knows what's going on. And that can be frustrating from that end too. So just think, has this ever happened to you? And I'm going to guess yes, because I think it's happened to pretty much everybody. So this ties into what I want to talk about today with invisible work. We're going to start with noticing. So think about being tired. And, as a teacher or a leader, you have certainly felt that, and you know exactly what I'm talking about, that feeling of exhaustion. And you might think that it comes from how much work that you're doing, the workload volume. But I don't think that's it. I think there's something else going on. Your workload volume is comprised of a couple things. One is the visible work, and that's probably what you think of when I say workload. Grading, lesson planning, meetings, parent communication, those are all normal parts of teaching. We do get tired from doing those things, but we're used to it. That's part of the job, and I think everybody knows that. We're used to that. That's the visible work that you're doing. That's the part that's on your job description. It's something that if somebody says teacher or somebody says principal, there's a set of tasks that would come to mind that everybody knows that you do. That's the visible. What is really causing your exhaustion, if you're like tired, is invisible work. And invisible work is when you're doing things like interpreting expectations. So after the meeting, when you're getting together and you're like, what exactly did they mean? Sometimes it's anticipating reactions. That could be a teacher to a leader, it could be a leader to their leader, it could be to a parent, where you're thinking, oh, if I do A, is B going to happen? And so you're kind of planning stuff out before it even occurs to try to preempt something. It could be mentally rehearsing conversations. Maybe there's somebody that's tricky to talk to, and you kind of go through the conversation in your head beforehand. It can even be rehashing conversations. So maybe afterwards, when you're like replaying, and try to figure out what exactly was meant by the conversation, and you're looking at tone and all this other stuff. It can be filling in gaps, and I think that happens a lot in schools. So, for example, maybe there's a new student referral that you're supposed to use, and so admin passes that out and says, use this referral now if you have student support issues. If you don't also know where to turn that in, what the timeline is, what exactly you're supposed to put on it, how much of an issue is it supposed to be before you can turn it in? Do you have to collect data first? There's a lot of questions that can come with something like that. So if it's not all explained, if it's not all given to you when you get the form, then you're filling in gaps. And that takes a lot of time because you don't have all the information, so you're making guesses. And there's even sometimes some anxiety of like, well, what if I don't do it right? What if that's not the way they want me to do it? So you might do and redo over and over again. And you are really you try not to do stuff wrong. You're worried about, is it right? So if there's not a clear expectations of what it's supposed to look like, you're going to be worried about doing it wrong. All of that takes a lot of mental energy. Sometimes it's time and physical energy too, because you're hunting down answers, or you're trying to talk to people, or you're asking clarifying questions. But it's really a lot of mental energy that you're taking. And that just, sometimes that gets stuck in your head and it kind of circles around. You might have had this where you finish the day, and maybe you even had a long day, and you go home late and you're just tired and you think, I worked all day. You think back and you're like, I was busy all day. I barely had time to use the bathroom. I ate lunch at my desk. I didn't have a spare second. But when I look back, what did I do? What did I get done? And you look at your to-do list and nothing is crossed off. You were working, but it's invisible work. So you were doing all these extra things that weren't on the to-do list that you had to do in order to do the to-do list. So all of that extra stuff that is around it, that's what's exhausting. And part of it's because it's not clear and you don't know for sure what it is. And so you're trying to do so much mental energy because it's not as simple as checking a box or adding this data. You're hunting stuff down, you're filling in gaps. And so that makes you more tired. And that can be that feeling of, I worked all day and I feel like I didn't get anything done. And a lot of us, both teachers and leaders, experience that. So I call that invisible work. And invisible work can be two things. It can be the work required to figure out the work, and it can be the work surrounding the work. So it can be two of those things. Often it's both. So some examples, if you're a teacher, if there's the intervention documentation that I just mentioned, you're supposed to do a student referral, but you're not sure, are you supposed to try strategies first, or do you just turn the referral form in? So you're not really sure what is included. And so you might have to find somebody to ask, or maybe you're embarrassed to ask, so you might ask somebody else, and you have all these conversations. So there's a lot that comes around there. That's work surrounding the work, and it's also required to do the actual work. Sometimes wondering if an email sounds right, especially if we're emailing, a sticky parent or a leader or somebody that we're a little nervous if our tone's going to be right. And so you might write it and rewrite it. You might have somebody else look at it. You might worry about whether or not it's right. That can be invisible work. Trying to interpret walkthrough feedback. Leaders do a lot of walkthroughs or different, short feedback that's not really part of something super formal. And so it might just be like a quick comment, and you might not know for sure what it means. If they say something like increase rigor in your lesson, you might start thinking, what exactly do they mean by that? Like, what do they want me to do? And so you might end up rewriting a whole lesson plan. You might end up adjusting a unit plan. You might end up doing 20 things when the leader only meant one little thing. But if it's not really clear, you're trying to figure it out. You're doing work around the work. Differentiation, that's a favorite one of mine because that's something that I think gets thrown around all the time. Teachers are always being told to differentiate, accommodate, do different things like that, but we very seldom say how they're supposed to do it. So it's really easy to say differentiate the lesson. That's easy, I just said it. But to do it is really hard. And there's lots of different ways you can differentiate, and there's different levels you can differentiate. So without that clarity of what you need to do, you end up spinning your wheels and probably doing a lot more work than you need to. So all of that for teachers is invisible work. And for leaders, you guys also have invisible work. A lot of leaders, especially relational leaders, will carry everyone else's emotional concerns because they care. I've been guilty of this too. When I have a team, I worry about my team just as much as when I'm a teacher in the classroom and I worry about my students. Like, I'm worried about how everybody's feeling. And if I see my team getting burnt out, if I see them getting tired, I often end up taking on extra work because I'm like, well, I'll carry it because I don't want you to. And that happens a lot. There's a lot of leaders that do that. And so that is invisible work that you're taking on. And it's coming from a good-hearted place, but it'll burn you out. Mentally preparing for difficult conversations. I've been a special education director, and so a big part of my job was to have the difficult IEP meetings. That was my job. If there was a parent that was maybe a little trickier or had some sort of legal needs going on, then it was my job to run those meetings. And so I had the most difficult conversations. And you better believe that I would mentally rehearse beforehand so that I could be ready, so I could say the right thing and do the right thing and keep everything calm and keep everybody happy. But that takes a lot out of somebody because you're rehearsing 20 possible scenarios, hoping you get the right one that actually shows up that day. Leaders, often you're trying to remember so many different moving pieces. Teachers are too. In the classroom with the different students, there's a lot going on and you're always switching. Leaders as well. A lot of times leaders are in between too. So like, you're trying to manage the teachers, you're thinking about the students, you have people above you that are giving pressure. So there's a lot of plates spinning for leaders all the time, and they're constantly trying to make sure that they're not dropping one. Translating district expectations is another one. Sometimes that is a big challenge. I remember one school I worked at was in the US, was a Bureau of Indian Education grant school. And what that meant is we were monitored by both the state and by the BIE. And I was the special education director. So that meant that my special education files had to be compliant with both the BIE rules and the state rules. And sometimes those rules were not the same. So I would have a file that had to somehow comply with two totally different rules. And I was evaluated by both. I was monitored by both. So sometimes that's a challenge. And you have to figure out, okay, how do I bridge that gap? How do I make both entities happy? Sometimes you get expectations from the district that have no backup whatsoever. I remember very early in my career that we had an off-site special education supervisor who would come in a couple times a year. And one year he came in at the start of the year, he said, okay, guys, I want you to co-teach now. And we said, okay, how do we do that? And he said, okay, co-teach now. And then he left. So we had to figure out, how do you do co-teaching? And like, this was really early in my career. So it was so early that it was pre-Google. So we couldn't even Google it. So we just had to find what we could find and kind of figure it out. And we did. And I think we did an okay job. But that certainly took a lot of extra work to figure that out because the person above me didn't give me clear directions. And so that happens with leaders all the time. Or you get an expectation that isn't realistic and you know it's not realistic for your building, but you've been told to do it. And you got to figure out, how do I make this work and keep my teachers happy with something that I know is not realistic? That's a lot of pressure, and leaders are dealing with that. So there's a lot. Invisible work, it's all over schools. It's not written anywhere. it's not something that is easy to point to because it happens around all these other things that are normal. And it often, it's like people use the iceberg analogy a lot, but it really does fit on this one. You have the tip of the iceberg that says intervention referral, and then underneath you have 20 different components that go into that. And so if we don't see those 20 different components, we think, oh, it's just one thing. That sounds really simple. And I can give you another example. This is one of my biggest early leadership mistakes. And I'm glad I made it though, because I actually learned a lot from it. But I was in a school and I was implementing progress monitoring. And so it was something that was kind of new. Again, this was a little while ago. It was kind of new. And so I was excited about it. I was like, this is pretty cool. We can take data and adjust stuff in real time. And I love data, so this is great. And so I developed all these 1-minute probes and gave them to teachers. And I was like, you just do this. It just takes a minute. It just takes a minute. And I said that all the time. I didn't realize how much I said it until I had a teacher who I really respected. She was a friend of mine. She was an excellent teacher and just somebody whose opinion mattered to me. And I was in a meeting and I was passing out yet another one of these probes. And I said, it just takes a minute. And she looked at me and she said, Kathy, if you say it just takes a minute one more time, she's like, I'm going to lose it. And it made me stop and think. And I realized, the probe might take a minute to actually do, like you time it for 1 minute with the kids. But how long does it take to make the copies? How long does it take to pass out the papers for the probe? To make sure everybody has a pencil, to make sure the pencil is sharpened, to make sure they understand what they're supposed to do, to actually have them do it, to collect it back, to store it, to organize it, to go through the data. It's not a minute. It's so much more than that. And when you add up all those 1-minute probes, it ended up being a significant amount of time. So I felt really bad, but I was so glad that she said something because it woke me up to all of that invisible work that I was asking people to do and I didn't realize it. So that happens a lot. It was progress monitoring. I still think it's great. I still think it's important, but you have to be realistic about it. And you have to look at what is hidden, what's the invisible work behind the task that I'm asking somebody to do. So I'm glad that she said that. We had a good laugh about it. We remained friends afterwards, but it was a good lesson for me. All right, it's time for the zombies to enter. There are certain things that just never seem to go away, and I call these zombie tasks or zombie expectations. And these are like open demands that just never seem to die. They just keep coming back again and again and again. And I've had this happen throughout my career where just some task that no matter what you do, like there's no end to it. And I'm not talking about like grading or lesson planning, because that also feels like it has no end. But I'm talking about some sort of task like something vague, like maybe be more intentional with your lessons. And you're like, how? Like, what does that mean? And it keeps popping up. And so you're supposed to just do it. You need to keep doing it. Or maybe it's some sort of collaboration that you're supposed to do, but nobody really knows what you're supposed to talk about or what the end goal is. Like, what is it that you're supposed to create? I had an experience like this at a school once where we had work groups that were focused on different things. And my work group was focused on the environment. But I didn't know, and nobody in my group knew what exactly we were supposed to do. And so we had a hard time even defining what was meant by environment. Was it just the physical environment or was it the emotional environment? Was it both? And then what were the parameters when we looked at if it's the physical environment, what exactly do you want us to do? Like, what do we put together? So it was just this really fuzzy problem. And I'm sure it came from a good place, but without some boundaries and expectations and clarity, it just kept coming up again and again and again and again all year and was never resolved. And so everybody put a lot of time and energy into it, but I don't think we ever did anything of use with that. So zombie expectations, they don't go away. They keep coming back. And sometimes they can be like zombie hordes where a whole bunch of them pop in at once. And it's like, oh, I forgot all about that. And all of a sudden you've got 10 tasks that somehow got dumped back on your plate and they still don't have an easy resolution. You still can't say, oh, I just need to check this box and search this data and write this summary and I'm done. It's never like that. There's always like, oh, I still need to find out what this means. I'm missing this information, but I don't know who to go to for that. So let me ask this person. And then if they don't know, and you start going through and it turns into 20 different tasks that you have to do that each have branches of other tasks going off depending on how it goes. That's a zombie task. There's questions that come from zombie tasks. What does this mean? Is this enough? If you don't know for sure where the target is this enough? Am I done? I don't know. Am I missing something? So if you have those demands, those tasks, those expectations that never ever go away, they're zombies. And I still think of them as zombies. So related to that, related to the invisible work, the zombie tasks, there's something called open loops. So you have the invisible work that gets in the way. You have the zombies that keep coming back. And that's the work that's happening. Then there's this thing called open loops. And this is kind of the psychological part that comes from the invisible work and the zombie tasks. So the open loops are what happen in your mind. And so this has a psychological impact. This is when you don't know what you're supposed to do. And so it gets in your head and it loops. It loops and loops and loops. And an open loop doesn't have a closing. It just keeps going again and again. So this is something that you will feel when you go home at the end of the day and you're trying to wind down and your mind just won't let go. And sometimes it's in the front of your mind and you're actually thinking about it, but sometimes it's in the back of your mind. And so you might not even fully feel it, but you just feel like this discomfort, like this itch in the back of your brain. It's an open loop because you're like, boom, 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 boom. What am I supposed to do? What does she mean by that? I don't know. And it goes around in circles again and again and again. It is extremely exhausting and it'll wear your energy out so fast, but we don't always even realize that it's happening. So let me give you an example. An open loop is not something like write my math plans for second period. That's a closed loop. You know what you have to do. Maybe there's some extra challenge with it because it's a sticky concept or something, but you know what you have to do. You know what a lesson plan looks like. You know what it looks like when it's done. It's something that is more open than that. One example would be waiting for clarification on something. So if you tried to do something and you emailed it to your leader or your partner and you're waiting for clarification on what comes next. So you're stuck in this holding pattern, you're stuck in a limbo and you can't really move on until you hear back from them. And so you're waiting so that you can go to the next step. Sometimes that person might not be good at getting back to you. And so you have to also remember to follow up and make sure like, hey, can you give me the feedback that I need? And you don't want to say it in a bad way, so you have to say it nicely. So it starts all these things and it's kind of sticking there like, don't forget. Sometimes you need to ask somebody, what does enough mean here? So what exactly do you want me to do? I had a school that I was at that I was leaving. I was moving on to another school, and the principal had asked me about transition, like how I was going to transition to the next teachers. And so I said, well, I did a student snapshot and I did a spreadsheet and give them the information they needed. And the principal's like, well, I want more than that. I want a little bit more, but then didn't define what more was. Then I tried to set a meeting, but the meeting kept not happening. I wasn't getting a response on availability and it just kept getting pushed. So the whole time I'm like, do I do the snapshot that I had developed or do I wait? Because I don't want to do it and then have to redo it. And so that waiting for clarification, waiting for what is enough, what is the expectation, it just kept it stuck in my head because I can't forget about it. I can't let it go because I need to make sure that I do something for transition, but I don't know what I'm supposed to do. So it takes up mental energy. Sometimes you don't know for sure how much is required for something. So what's enough? How much work do you want me to do with it? Is it a surface report or is it something that's really detailed? Do you just want a snapshot or do you want like a full dossier on each kid? You can't plan your time if you don't know how much work is required. And so that's one of the things that also can be an open loop and get stuck in your head. So let's look at some going to the next step of naming and responsing. So with open loops, with invisible work, with all of that, what we want to do is we need to reduce the load. That's the goal. You can't just eliminate it. I don't have a magic wand for that. I don't have a magic wand for special ed, and I don't have a magic wand for this. But you can reduce it. And so that's what I want to get into. We've talked about the noticing. We know what it is. We talked about naming the invisible work and the open loops. But we need to now get into a point where we can do something about it. So for what you can do to respond for the open loops is you can actually write them down. And that's one of the first things that you can do. You need to get it out of your head. I'm going to go into this more in the next podcast episode, but I wanted to give you a little bit today so that you have something. So if you have open loops, if you have stuff that's stuck in there and it's going around and around, your number one thing, just write it down. Write down everything that you need to know. If you need to know, oh, I have to check with Susie to get clarification on XYZ. I need to talk to my principal and see exactly how much she wants me to do on this. So whatever it is that you're wondering about, I need to know when that meeting is because they didn't respond to me. Just write it down. You don't have to come up with a solution, but just having it written down, it gets it out of your head, and then your brain's able to let it go because it lives someplace else now. So that's step one, and that will make a difference. That will help you. I'll talk about more, like I said, in the next episode. So once you've written it down, once you've kind of helped with the open loops, we also have to think about sustaining. So remember, sustaining is about putting systems in place so stuff doesn't keep happening. And I just want to mention a little bit with sustaining. Invisible work doesn't happen because people don't care. Most of the time, the leaders are caring, wonderful, relational people, and they're doing the best that they can. But they might not realize always what is causing some of this friction and what's causing the invisible work. So they might not be aware. Sometimes they are aware, but they don't know how to fix it. So when we think about sustaining, I want to be really careful that we're not blaming people and we're not saying this exists because this person's a bad leader or this teacher doesn't know how to do their job. That's not the case. Usually, this invisible work, it starts with good people, good intentions, meaningful initiatives. So things that start from a good place, kind of like my little progress monitoring, it came from a good place. I thought that it would be something that would really help us with instruction with kids. And I actually thought it would save teachers time. That was one of the things I liked about it. I'm like, oh, it's so quick. So it came from a good place. My heart was in the right place. It meant to be a good and meaningful initiative, but the invisible work still came with it. So just think about that. When we talk about sustaining, sometimes it takes a couple tries to get it right and to figure out exactly where the invisible work is so that we can do something about it. As leaders, we need to think about improvement not as accumulation. So we're not trying to add things on. We need to think about improvement as integration. So my progress monitoring, I was adding on. I didn't take anything away. And that's a mistake. We need to look anytime we want to do an initiative, anytime we want to add something, we need to think, how does this become integrated? How do we take something away or combine something or replace something in order to make this work? So that's some of the sustaining work that leaders can do to help make sure that we're not adding invisible work on for other people. So it takes time and it's not easy. And just keep in mind, mistakes will be made, but a lot of times those mistakes come from good places. They come with a good heart. Questions you can ask yourself as a leader or as a teacher if you're trying to implement something with a team. Number one, what are we asking people to interpret? So really pause, and whatever it is that you're giving people, stop and think, what is not said here? what is something that somebody's going to have to figure out on their own? Sometimes there's little things that you can assume everybody's going to know how to do, but sometimes there's other pieces that maybe you as the specialist recognize that somebody else didn't. With my special education background, if you've ever talked to a special ed teacher, you know that we love acronyms and we love to throw those out. I forget sometimes when I'm talking to non-special ed people that not everybody knows that stuff. So if I am not careful and I'm using a lot of acronyms, or I'm using processes that are very familiar to special education folks but are not familiar to gen ed, then I'm causing people to interpret things they don't have to interpret. So we got to pause and just think about that. What expectations are unclear? Sometimes we can figure that out ourselves, but sometimes we need to ask somebody. I think it's really good to just ask a friend or do a little pilot and have somebody try out something new that you want to do, so that they can say, oh, you know what? I got stuck on step 2. I wasn't sure what to do. I don't know what this means. Just that one little extra step will help to make sure that you're catching any expectations that make sense to you, but maybe they don't make sense to the other person. And then I think most importantly, what work did we add without removing something? I very firmly believe that we should never add anything unless we take something away. We just can't. There's already so much on our plates, whether you're a teacher or a leader, no matter where you are in the school. There's nobody that works in a school that doesn't already have a plate that's overflowing with work. There's nobody. So we just can't. You can't add something out. You got to find something. You got to give something up. So working with the team to figure out what can I take away or what can I replace, that has to become a priority. I feel that, to me, that's a non-negotiable. I feel it really strongly. So let's recap what we talked about through this first episode. We noticed some stuff. We noticed exhaustion. We noticed uncertainty. We noticed invisible work. We named some things. We named open loops, zombie expectations, and we talked about the work that surrounds the work. So we named all of that. We did a little bit of response through the open loops when we talked about writing it down and getting it out of your head, and we'll do more in episode 2. And we talked a little bit about sustaining when we talked about accumulation versus integration. Next episode, we'll dig into both of those more, and I'm going to give you some more concrete steps of what to do. Once you notice this invisible work, you're going to start seeing it everywhere. So now that you've listened to this episode, start noticing, and you're going to see every day, you're like, oh, wow. And you're going to notice all these other pieces that you're doing that you were just doing and not thinking about, or maybe you were thinking about it and it was stuck in an open loop, but you'll start seeing it everywhere. The good thing is once you see it, you can name it, and then you can decide what to do with it. So there's power in that. Notice, name, respond, sustain. Okay, until next time, notice what matters, name what's getting in the way, and remember to reduce the noise and protect the work that matters.